To take to pace the perfect marathon. That's what we're talking about on today's video. My name is Brad from CoachParry.com, where we help runners like you become fitter, faster, and stronger. And I'm going to be joined by one of our running coaches, Marcus van Niekerk, today, where we talk about what do you do to pace the perfect marathon? Should it be a positive split, negative split, even splits? We'll also be talking about things you can do and strategies to ensure that you finish strong and have a great final third of the marathon, because that is where most people struggle when it comes to marathon running. And also, we'll be taking a look at some of the things you need to do and put in place before you run the marathon that'll get you to pacing the perfect marathon. That's all coming up next. Marcus, marathon pacing, it's probably one of the hardest things to get right, but when you do nail it, it's one of the best feelings in the world. What's the secret to a perfectly paced marathon?
Brad, very good question. And if I could think of one word, it's called patience.
Tell me more.
First and foremost, the word patience, realistic goal setting, and pacing, those are the things that plays a role on the day. It doesn't help that you run a 90-minute, let's call it a 90-minute 21 kilometer, and you want to go sub 3, because it's double the distance. You are going to slow down as you progress, or your starting speed will have to be slower as well. So setting a realistic goal, that's the first box that you need to be ticking. The second one is work out an accurate pacing chart. Those on the platform, they're lucky enough. Usually we help out with something like that. But find a pacing chart based on your what's possible or not, and then be patient, stick to that pacing chart, because that's the one thing that's going to guide you to your end goal. It's like a roadmap. If you're going to follow the directions, you're eventually going to get to your destination. And that's what's most important, is people are impatient, they feel great, but they make the mistake of feeling great in the beginning. They overpower it a bit, and then they pay for it at the end. And it's always, once you realize that you've gone out too hard, it's too late.
Yeah, Marcus, that leads perfectly into my next question. And we've seen people talk about it so often. We talk about splits. Positive splits, negative splits, even splits. Obviously, a negative split is hard to do in a marathon, going out faster in the second half than in the first half. But like you said, patience is the key, and often we feel good because we've come into a marathon, we've done the training, we've tapered, we're feeling fresh. It's easy to get carried away with the excitement, but what's the best way to approach it from a splits perspective? What should we be aiming for? Positive, negative, or even splits?
So Brad, I'm a big fan of even splits, because more often than not, if your training was good, you had a good taper leading up to the event, and you have a realistic goal in place, the chances of you doing an even split and possibly going negative towards the end, the chances are rather big for that. So negative split would be a cherry on the top. Even split would be perfectly executed race plan, because if you start a race too hard, I always like to look at it from a graph perspective. If you start too hard and you lose speed towards the end, that's when the process starts to control you. But if you start slightly slower, more conservative, and you control the process all the way, I can guarantee you the time lost by starting slight bit slower compared to starting a bit too fast and then losing control of that process throughout usually I call it from about 36 kilometers, depending on how hard or how too hard the person went out. I can guarantee you from about 30 odd, maybe 36 kilometers, he's going to start sweating blood.
Yeah, Marcus, that's a pretty good point as well, because often we hear people say, you know what, I'm going to go and try and bank some time in the first half so that when I do feel fatigue in the second, I've got something in the bank. And you typically are going to lose more in that second half than you can bank. And the harder you go out, the more you put in the bank, typically the more you lose in the second half.
100%. There is no such thing as putting, unless the route profile does allow for that. That's obviously something that plays a massive role. Is what does the route profile look like? Is it is it quite a lot of climbing? Is it downhill? Kaapse Whip is a great thing. Kaapse Whip is known for its long downhill and that 4-kilometer drag towards the end. So what the people do is they don't necessarily pick up on how hard their legs are working because they're running downhill, and then they overcook it a bit, and when they get to the 38-kilometer mark, they look at this mountain, which is really not that steep, but then they've already gone out too hard and they pay for it dearly towards the end. And it's very important to listen to your body, but on race day, also look at your pacing chart.
Yeah, you mentioned the patience, the 1P. The second one's obviously planning, and it ties into the pacing chart, so knowing what the route profile is going to be and planning accordingly for that. But marathon runners notoriously struggle in the final third of a marathon. You mentioned 30 Ks to about 38. In mile terms, you're probably looking from about mile 20 to mile 24, where it becomes really, really tough, and everyone struggles at that point in time. But what's the key to running a really good final third of a marathon?
Brad, believe it or not, what's really going to help you there were those sessions that you did at an aerobic capacity or aerobic intensity, because that's the engine that Lindsay and myself likes to refer to. Because if the bigger your engine is, the more your natural speed is going to be. So, as you know, as you go further in the marathon, it's not necessarily the intensity that's picked up. It's the effort that has to go up in order to meet the same intensity. So in order to maintain that pace, the effort will have to increase just to make sure you keep on operating on that level. And had you gone out conservatively, be patient in the first 2/3, ticking that last box will be way easier than having to try and micromanage and grab an extra gel or some more Coke just to try and make up for that shortfall. So if you want to run the last third of a marathon good, make sure you bank on your long runs, make sure that you train at the right intensity. And then if you follow those simple pieces of advice, I can guarantee you, if you are patient, you follow a pacing chart, and you've worked out your race, I can guarantee you that the last third of your event will be a good one.
How much does the mental side of things play into it, particularly in that final third? And I've heard it said that a marathon's not 42 kilometers or 26 miles, it's 6 inches, and it's the 6 inches between your ears and how you manage that. What's your take on the mental side of marathon running when it comes to pacing the perfect marathon?
So that, Brad, it's a very good question. And what I'd like to chat to my athletes about is, at the end of the day, they need to make sure that they understand why they are there, what their goal was, and whether they achieve that goal or not, they must make sure that they achieve it. And I know it sounds a bit soppy and cliche, but really, if you enjoy your day out, you're going to be focusing on all the positives. And talking about focusing on the positives, I also like to remind my guys what they did in preparation for that event. Because had their preparation been good, I know you're on a long streak with ticking green blocks with regards to being consistent in training, those are the things that, whether it's in your subconscious, those are the things that's going to be carrying you on race day. It's going to make you be in a more positive mindset had you not been ticking those boxes.
Yeah, it's keeping positivity, like you say, but also picking up small wins and taking positivity out of certain things. And I think that wraps things up nicely. We started with even splits or negative splits or positive splits. And one thing that I've found when I've run either an even split or a negative split marathon is you tend to be passing a hell of a lot more people in the second half of a marathon than you being passed, if that makes sense. And that for me is such a big boost. I almost feel like I'm about to win the race, even though I'm only running a 4.5 or a 5 hour marathon, because nobody passes me in the second half of a marathon. And that makes me feel amazing, regardless of the time I'm running. And little things like that give you so much energy.
Right, that is such a true thing that you just said. I'll never forget when I did I think it was my second Ironman, and in the marathon I was absolutely broken. But the one thing that kept me going, and I know not all races have got your name on your race number, but the one thing that kept me going was people calling me by my name, and the second thing was hearing people, "Jeepers, look at how fresh he looks," and those were the things that I was banking on the whole time. And not just that, interact with the crowd. If you have the energy to do that, I'll never forget my first marathon I did with Lindsay, which was Johnson Crane. I think it was in 2017, and we just happened to bump into each other. And it was more like a show that I was watching, because Lindsay was having a field day interacting with the people at the water stations, people cheering for us. He was just, and before I knew it, we had 2Ks to go, and it was an awesome experience. So had we gone for a PB on the day, it might have been a different story. But yes, feed on the people that surround you, and feeling good and passing people, it makes a massive difference, a massive difference.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget, if you don't want to miss out on any of our videos, make sure you click the subscribe button over here. You can watch our latest video over here, and be sure to check out one of our most popular videos over here. And then also, if you want to catch up and grab one of our free strength training programs, all you need to do is click over here.